The Rock Whisperer. Do you hear the earth talking to you?
Factors of Infiltration, Unit 6-3. So earlier we mentioned infiltration, water seeping into the ground. So we have water that either melts as from snow or rain, and it soaks or seeps into the ground. So there's a couple different factors that influence how fast or slow that water is going to percolate or go into the groundwater, to the water table. So on the bottom here I have some pictures, and then I've left you some room on the top to add some notes as we go along. So if we live in a desert type condition, someplace that's dry or hot, the amount of water that's going to seep in is going to be less. A lot of the water will evaporate compared to an area like this that is more of kind of like where we live, like a deciduous forest, that you're going to have an area that will allow the water to soak in a little bit easier. In the desert, sometimes the land becomes baked and really dry. It makes it very difficult for the water to soak in. In this particular picture, we're talking about the slope of the land. How steep is the slope? And we can look at the varying degrees A, B, C, and D. Letter D looks like it's the most shallow, so water will sit in that area and will be able to sit and flow and go into the ground a little bit easier, compared to B that you can see is fairly steep. And because it's so steep, that the water is going to hit and it's going to just run right off, and it's not going to have time to soak into the ground. A and C are a little bit more shallow, but still there's quite a bit of slope there, so some of it will and some of it won't soak in. So you can see, depending on that degree of that angle that you have, will determine how much water is going to soak in. The soil, how closely packed together the soil is, has a lot to do with what is going on. Think about the fields in Galway. If you have fields that have just been tilled or plowed and the soil is really loose, water is going to soak in really easy, compared to some place that maybe you have a path that the tractors have driven over a lot, and the soil gets a little bit more packed together. If you compare these two diagrams here, and the water would not soak in or infiltrate nearly as much. Vegetation in the area. Again, an area like Galway, New York, or upstate New York, you're going to have an area that has a lot of vegetation. Vegetation soaks up water, so as the water's hitting the ground and starting to infiltrate, the vegetation is going to soak it up, so you can have a lot more water that falls. Compared to an area more like a desert type area, you're not going to have a lot of infiltration, because the plants are not there to help soak up as much of the water. How the land is used. Two drastic examples. Talking about a parking lot in Amsterdam. Not a lot of water is going to infiltrate. We have pavement and very little grass, so that water is going to hit and just run off and wind up in the drains. Compared to some of the fields around this area, we'll have a lot of water that will soak in because of the way that the land is being used. And the last one we have talks about the degree of saturation. What is the land like? Now this is kind of an extreme picture of being dry, that the land is actually starting to crack. But if we have a dry area, you're going to have a lot of water that's going to soak in. So a drier area would allow a lot of water to soak in. Now in this particular example, if the ground was actually this hard, it probably wouldn't, a lot of it wouldn't soak in right away. It would take a while to loosen that soil back up. But we're starting to get to this particular point here in upstate New York. We have snow melting, the ground starting to thaw out, and we have a high degree of saturation already. The water table is actually up to the surface of the land, and no water can infiltrate at this particular point. You can see the pond that's starting to form here, and the grass is trying to grow through it. But because the water table is so high, no more water can soak into the ground at that point.
Don't forget to listen to the earth. You just may hear it speak.